fractions: adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. Okay, so when you're adding or subtracting two fractions, you have to make sure that the denominators are the same. And to do that, you need to find a common denominator. To find a common denominator, what you need to do is you need to find a common multiple between their denominators. Ideally, you'd want to find the lowest common multiple because it just makes your calculations that little bit easier. But any common multiple will do. Okay, so if you have a look at this question here, it says work out 2/5 plus 1/7. As you can see, the denominators are not the same. Right, so what you should do is you can take the bigger denominator at the 2, which is a 7, go through its multiples and choose a multiple whereby 5 goes into it as well. Or a quick way to find a common multiple is if you just multiply these two numbers. So if I do 5 times 7, that gives me 35. And as you can see, 35, both 5 and 7 goes into it. So what that means is we can put both of these fractions over 35. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it out like this. So we know that we can convert both fractions so they have a denominator of 35. Right, so what we do here is we use equivalent fractions. So if we have 2/5, how can we use equivalent fractions to make the denominator 35? Well, we had to multiply 5 by 7 to give us 35. So we do the same at the top. Remember, with equivalent fractions, you multiply by the same number top and bottom. So we do 2 times 7 as well, which is 14. So I'll just put 14 on the top there. Remember, these are exactly the same fractions. They're equivalent. Okay, moving on to the second fraction, we have a 7th. Okay, how did we get from 7 to 35? Well, we multiplied that 7 by 5, didn't we? So we do the same at the top. 1 times 5 is 5. So I can put a 5 on the top. Now that the denominators are the same, we can go ahead and add the two fractions. You just simply add the two numbers at the top, or the two numerators. 14 add 5 is 19. And of course the denominator is 35. So that is your answer to this particular question. It's just 19 over 35. Remember that this is the same, effectively it's the same question, because the fractions are actually saying 14 over 35 is exactly the same as 2/5. It's the same proportion. This 5/35 is the same as 1/7. Right, with subtraction it's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same procedure, but in the end you just subtract the two fractions. So you find the common denominator, use equivalent fractions to put both fractions over that common denominator, and then you just subtract them. Okay, moving on. Okay, so let's have a look at an example where you have to multiply two fractions. So multiplying fractions and dividing fractions is actually easier than adding or subtracting, because you don't have to find a common denominator. It doesn't matter if these denominators are different. Okay, so how do you multiply two fractions? Well, what you do is you just multiply across the top and then multiply across the bottom. So if you have 3/4 multiplied by 1/5, 1 over 5, you just multiply across the top. So we have 3 times 1, multiplying the two numerators, and you multiply the two denominators separately, so 4 times 5. And that is just equal to, well, 3 times 1 is 3, and that is all over 4 times 5, which is 20. And that is your answer. Your answer to this question is just 3 over 20. Okay, moving on, let's have a look at a division question. Okay, if you have a look at this question here, it says 12.5 divided by 5/8. Okay, this is slightly different to our two previous examples because now we have a mixed number. A mixed number is where you have a whole number and a fraction. Okay, so whenever you have mixed numbers, what you want to do is you want to convert that mixed number into a top-heavy fraction before you carry out any addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. Okay, so how do we convert this into a top-heavy fraction? Well, think about what this actually means. We have 12 whole ones and a half. So, right, 12 whole ones. Remember, a whole one consists of 2 halves, doesn't it? Remember, 2 out of 2, or 2 halves, is equal to 1. So if you have 12 whole ones, what that means is we have 2 halves, another 2 halves, 2 halves. So you have 12 of those. So what we have is we have 24 halves altogether. 24 halves will give us 12 whole ones, because as I said before, there's 2 halves in one whole one. But we don't just have 12 whole ones, we also have an extra half. So in total we have 24 halves. Add this extra half, which gives you 25/2. Okay, so that's just to help you understand how we convert between mixed numbers and top-heavy fractions. But a quick way to do this is you just multiply the denominator with the whole number and then add the numerator. So you do 2 times 12, which gives you 24. So that gives you the number of halves in the whole one, the number of halves in 12 whole ones. And we add this one here because that's the extra half. We have 12.5 and not just 12. Okay, so I can rewrite this fraction as 25/2. The second fraction stays as it is. So we have 25/2 divided by 5/8. Okay, so division, when you're dividing two fractions, it's very similar to multiplying two fractions. What you do is you flip this second fraction here and then it turns into a multiplication. So that first fraction stays as it is. We have 25/2. Okay, that second fraction becomes, well, that's flipped over, so we have 8/5. You just simply reverse it, and now it becomes a multiplication. So once you flip that second fraction, it turns into a multiplication. And then we multiply as normal. So we multiply across the top. So we have 25 multiplied by 8. Okay, 25 multiplied by 8, if you go up in your 25s, 25, 50, 75, 100, 8 of those will give you 200. Right, and at the bottom we have 2 times 5, which is just 10. So we have 200/10. Okay, so remember, with fractions you want to simplify them as much as possible. So this can actually be simplified. So remember what this actually means. This line in the fraction means divide. So 200 divided by 10 is just simply 20. 10 times 20 is 200. So this actually gives you a whole number, which is 20. The answer to this question is a whole number. So 12.5 divided by 5/8 is equal to 20. So that's how you add, subtract, multiply, and divide two fractions.